On January 3rd, 1889, a man threw his arms around a horse's neck in the middle of a street in Turin, Italy, and started sobbing. He never recovered. He never spoke a coherent sentence again. He spent the last 11 years of his life in silence. That man was Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who declared God dead, and the world made sure he paid for it, before the madness, before the scandal, before the world turned on him. Friedrich Nietzsche was considered a prodigy. Born in 1844 in a small German town, he was the son of a Lutheran pastor who died when Friedrich was just 5 years old. From that moment he was raised in a house full of women, his mother, his sister, his grandmother, his aunts. And quietly Friedrich began to question everything they believed in. By 24, he was a professor at the University of Basel, the youngest they had ever hired. He hadn't even finished his PhD yet. They gave him the job anyway. That's how brilliant he was. In 1868, Nietzsche met the composer Richard Wagner, and it changed his life. Wagner was everything Nietzsche wanted to be: bold, provocative, celebrated, a man who didn't ask for the world's approval. He took it. For years they were inseparable. Nietzsche wrote his first major book, The Birth of Tragedy, essentially as a love letter to Wagner's genius. It was supposed to launch his career. Instead, it nearly ended it. The academic establishment absolutely destroyed The Birth of Tragedy. Top classical scholars said it was embarrassing, unscientific, embarrassingly romantic. One critic called it the work of someone who has completely lost the plot. Overnight, Nietzsche went from the most promising young scholar in Germany to a joke. Students stopped signing up for his classes. Some semesters he had exactly 2 students. One of them was a friend who felt sorry for him. He kept writing. Nobody was reading. Then his body started breaking down. He had served briefly in the Franco-Prussian War as a medical orderly and contracted diphtheria and dysentery at the same time. His eyesight deteriorated so severely he could barely read or write. He suffered catastrophic migraines, the kind that left him bedridden for days, unable to move, unable to think. He wrote entire books in physical agony. He dictated to friends. He scribbled notes in near darkness. In one letter he wrote, "My existence is a terrible burden," and he kept going anyway. "Out of life's school of war, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger." And then he lost his best friend. Wagner had moved in a direction Nietzsche despised, leaning into German nationalism, anti-Semitism, and a kind of cheap populist Christianity that Nietzsche found pathetic. When Wagner premiered Parsifal, a deeply Christian opera, Nietzsche was disgusted. He ended the friendship publicly and brutally. He called Wagner a disease. He wrote an entire book dismantling him, The Case Against Wagner. Wagner died before he could respond. Nietzsche was now alone, truly alone. Now, let's talk about the thing that made him famous and made him enemies for the rest of time. In 1882, Nietzsche published The Gay Science, and in it he wrote one of the most misunderstood sentences in the history of human thought: "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." Here's what most people think he meant. Nietzsche hated God. Nietzsche was evil. Nietzsche was an atheist trying to corrupt the world. Here's what he actually meant. Europe had already stopped truly believing. Science, the Enlightenment, rational thinking, they had quietly murdered the certainty that God provided. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating. He was sounding the alarm, because without God, without that shared foundation of meaning, what happens to morality? What happens to purpose? What happens to human beings who suddenly have no answers? His warning was, be careful what you tear down, because nothing is ready to replace it. He followed that with his masterpiece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. In it he introduced the concept of the Übermensch, the overman, a new kind of human who creates their own values, who doesn't need God or the herd to tell them who to be. Nietzsche saw this as the next evolution of humanity, an individual who takes full responsibility for their existence. You know who completely misread this? The Nazis. They turned his overman into a racial fantasy about Aryan supremacy. Nietzsche, who had called German nationalism a sickness, who had broken with Wagner partly over anti-Semitism, was twisted into a poster child for fascism. The man who saw the danger of herd mentality became the mascot of the most extreme herd in modern history. The irony is almost unbearable. While he was writing all of this, the ideas that would reshape Western philosophy, nobody was buying his books. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, considered one of the greatest works of philosophy ever written, sold fewer than 40 copies in its first year. Nietzsche paid to have part of it printed himself. He sent copies to people who didn't respond. He wrote to a friend, "I have given mankind the greatest gift it has ever been given, and no one has noticed." He wasn't wrong, they just weren't ready yet. Nietzsche's sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, was everything her brother despised. She was a German nationalist. She married a virulent anti-Semite. She actually moved to Paraguay to found a racially pure German colony, which completely failed, by the way. Her husband killed himself there. She came back to Germany, and when Friedrich collapsed, she took control of everything. His manuscripts, his unpublished notes, his archive, his image. She edited his work, she invented letters. She stitched together a book called The Will to Power from his private notebooks, cutting, rearranging, and adding her own nationalist spin. Then she handed the whole package to the Nazi Party, who made Nietzsche their philosopher of choice. Adolf Hitler attended her funeral in 1935. He stood at her grave and praised her work. Friedrich Nietzsche, a man who had written, "Whenever I seek another word for music, I always find only the word Venice," a man of almost unbearable sensitivity and beauty, became the intellectual father of the Holocaust. Because of his sister, Nietzsche stepped outside. He saw a horse being whipped by a coachman. He ran to the horse, threw his arms around its neck, and collapsed into tears. Neighbors carried him back to his apartment. He wrote a series of short, frantic letters in the days that followed, signing them Dionysus or the Crucified. He wrote to the King of Italy. He wrote to Bismarck declaring war. He told his friends the Pope was in prison and that he was having all anti-Semites shot. His mind was gone. The cause? Scholars still debated. Syphilis, a rare brain disorder. The sheer accumulated weight of isolation, illness, and rejected genius. Maybe all of it at once. His mother and sister took him home. He lived 11 more years. He sat, he stared. He occasionally played piano by ear in the dark. He died on August 25, 1900, at 55. After his death, only after his death, the world finally started reading. The 20th century was built on Nietzsche, existentialism, postmodernism, Freud, Heidegger, Camus, Sartre. The question of how to find meaning without religion, the defining crisis of modern life, was a question Nietzsche had already spent his entire life screaming into the void. He saw the 20th century coming. He warned about nationalism, nihilism, the collapse of shared meaning, the rise of ideological mobs. He called all of it. He wrote it down, and he was locked in a chair, silent, while history proved him right about almost everything. Nietzsche didn't destroy God, he just noticed that we already had. He spent his life asking what comes next, and the world spent a century proving he was right to be scared of the answer. The man who said God was dead never got to see whether humanity would find something better to replace him. He just sat in his chair, staring out a window in silence for 11 years.